Attention everyone. I know this is Old Home Week and we haven't seen our colleagues for about 2.5 years, but we're going to get started. First, before starting, I just need to see a show of hands, and I'm expecting to see only 3 hands raised. How many of you consider yourself not retired? Oh my goodness. You know what? You're in the wrong room. I think you should be in another room. Okay. But welcome anyways. And we hope you're all members of MURA, the McGill University Retiree Association. If you're not, we're gonna grab you at the door. So I was really expecting to see 3 hands. The Right Honourable David Johnson, of course. He's not retired, and he's a huge force in our nation after graduating from McGill as principal. And Dr. Richard Cruz, who is here with us today, and Kellyanne Benoit. But I thought that was it. I thought those were the only hands that were going to raise. So you've shocked me today. So, and I am retired, but not very retiring, which is why I guess I got stuck with the job of MC. So, first of all, I would like you to please silence your smartphones, which won't be so smart if they ring in the middle of this session. And you each have in front of you index card that our moderator, Michael Kiefer, will be asking, will be posing these questions that you prepare. We have a few that have been submitted in advance that will be posed, but if you think of something as the presentation goes on, please feel free to write your question on one of those index cards and give them to Lawrence Mizak. Lawrence, could you raise your hand? And to Kate McGuire, who's also raised her hand, she'll be circulating. And following this fireside chat, which it may be a misnomer without the fire, you will have an opportunity to have His Excellency sign your books or dedicate your books to the person of your choice. So, and Karen Kavanagh, raise your hand, please. Karen will show you or Kelly and Benoit from the Governor General's office, from the Rideau Hall Foundation, will show you the right way to put the Post-it note in the book, because there's a science to it. So, right now, Ante Padgett, the president of MURA, will welcome you, and then I will introduce the moderator, and Jeanette Lamontagne will introduce our guest speaker, our esteemed guest speaker. Thank you. Ante.
Without this. Well, good morning, everybody. It's my great pleasure to be here and to really welcome our distinguished guests and all of the members of MURA and others to this very unique event on the agenda of MURA, McGill University Retiree Association. We have never had such a distinguished guest, and indeed, our guest has achieved so many things, starting being principal of McGill, being Governor General. Apparently, my voice doesn't carry much. Pick it up. It may not be pickable. How about now? Okay. Should I start from beginning, or I could carry on? Okay. Really, His Excellency or Right Honourable David Lloyd Johnson has so many things behind him, and I believe in front, that it's very hard to understand how somebody could achieve all these things. Now, this mystery will be revealed soon in a discussion between Michael Kiefer and our distinguished guests, where all the secrets will be revealed, and we'll learn more of what we should do to be good Canadians, to be good academics, to be good fathers, husbands, and grandfathers. So really, this is one of the heroes of today that are... Okay, it seems that I will have to repeat the whole thing because the back did not hear. Okay. Thank you. Now,
obviously.
We have one more hero to welcome, and this is my particular hero, Dick Cruz, my dean, my inspiration, and how would we call it, godfather of a very important project in my life, which is called I Medici di McGill. Dean Cruz has been one of the new breeds of medical educators and practitioners that reminded us that medicine is not science, but it is a humanistic activity, and he has tolerated us for a number of years, and we are still here after 34 years as a public outreach institution at the Faculty of Medicine. I also have to thank all those that contributed to this event, members of Executive Committee of MURA, starting with Jeanette, Bob, Kathy, John, and Rosemary, and also members of the MURA board, Lawrence, and Debbie, of course. Without Debbie, you're too close. That's why you shine too much. Well, it is customary now to remember that where we are, there used to be somebody else, and that we took it over, and this is the new, we used to start at McGill with prayers. Now we are actually replacing it with this statement that McGill University is situated on the land which has long served as a site of meetings and exchange among indigenous people, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse indigenous population of people whose presence marks this territory on which people of the world now gather. These are tremendous words, but I always say, how about deeds? How many times you pass by indigenous populations lying on the floor, on the cold floor of the Drummond Street, climbing up the hill? Has anybody stopped and done something? If not, you have a chance this winter. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're much taller than me, Auntie. And now to introduce my former boss, the former VP Advancement at McGill, and someone who has become a personal friend. As you can see in the bio distributed in today's program, Michael Kiefer has had an illustrious career raising private funding for educational institutions that directly supported university students striving to realize their dreams. Working shoulder to shoulder with the Right Honourable David Johnston and key campaign volunteers, Michael was captain of the Alumni and Development ship that raised $206 million and change for the McGill 21st Century Fund in 1995. I worked with and for Michael in the early 90s as the administrative officer for advancement handling HR and budget issues. I can assure you that my time working with Michael was a lesson in diligence, striving for the best possible outcome, if not perfection. Right, Susan Button? Okay. And an all-encompassing commitment to building human relationships with integrity, with humor, and with selflessness. Back then, with no sign of any change over the next 28 years since he worked at McGill, Michael was consultative, courageous, open, honest, tough, but fair, leader, constantly pushing himself, inspiring his team and others to stretch their capacity and be successful. At least one of McGill's principals, and probably the esteemed gentleman that's sitting beside him today, would say that Michael always punched above his weight. In short, Michael is the personification of all the laudable personal attitudes, approaches, and habits that Mr. Johnston outlines in his book, Trust. McGill benefited greatly from the brand of leadership exhibited by these two gentlemen, and of course Dr. Cruz, that is so eloquently described in Mr. Johnston's book, Trust, that's available outside here today. Our former Vice Principal Advancement and my former boss, Michael, retired from Dartmouth University in June. Given Michael's many talents and successes, I am anxious to see what Michael 2.0 will tackle next. Michael Kiefer is an avid tennis player, skier, and track and field athlete. Next year, he will represent Massachusetts in the U.S. National Senior Games in the 50 and 100 meter dashes and the triple jump. Congratulations, Michael, and welcome back to McGill.
Bravo.
Now Jeanette will introduce our former principal and former Governor General of Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Can you hear me all? Yes? Very good. Votre Excellence, cher Michael, chers collègues, bonjour. C'est un plaisir de vous accueillir en si grand nombre aujourd'hui pour accueillir notre ancien principal, le très honorable David Lloyd Johnson, que j'ai l'honneur d'introduire aujourd'hui. The Right Honourable David Lloyd Johnson is certainly a well-known Canadian, yet in researching his many accomplishments, I learned a lot that I would like to share with you. A prolific teacher and researcher, he wrote over 30 books, the majority in his domain of expertise, law and technologies, securities, regulations, cyber law. He received 36 honorary doctorates from institutions across Canada. Upon becoming Governor General in 2010, his focus became Canada and Canadians. In Trust, his latest publication, he shares his love of Canada and engages his fellow citizens in making a better, more caring, and just country. Volunteerism and philanthropy are values he promotes, and he certainly leads by example as founder and chair of the Rideau Hall Foundation and its far-reaching charitable initiatives. When talking with McGill folks, everyone has a story about how, once introduced, David Johnson will never forget your name and will recall the last conversation he had with you. Although a great academic leader, advancing knowledge on scholarly legal issues, the warmth he manifested always in social situations is truly remarkable. Another trait of his personality is his trust in his co-workers and the encouragement he provides to his colleagues. I personally benefited from it when, as principal of McGill, he entrusted me with the government relations portfolio, and I became the first in Quebec and one of the first in Canada to perform this role in a university, reaching out to department officials and elected representatives to inform them of the important work being done in universities and ensuring their support. Thank you, Your Excellency, for your trust in me. Finally, as this is a hockey town, I would be remiss not to mention that David Johnson played hockey starting as a young boy in Sault Ste. Marie and through his university studies at Harvard. He resisted being drafted as a professional, but continued to play throughout his adult life. You'll be pleased to know that since 2018, there is a hockey trophy named the David Johnson University Cup, awarded each year to the winning Canadian university hockey team. For more information on our distinguished guest's amazing career dedicated to public service, I encourage you to read his bio in the program. Thank you, merci. And now it's time for a fireside chat.
Wow. What a bio. Well, hello, boss. Everybody has urged me to address you at least once as Excellency, so I shall do that in this sentence. But you are the best boss I ever had, and boss feels like the right term. What do you think?
Well, let me tell you a story, Michael. That I think is intended to be a term of respect. And when I went from McGill, where the term was not used very often, I arrived at the University of Waterloo, and in the Faculty of Engineering, they began calling me boss or chief. And I thought, you know, engineers are pretty pragmatic people, and they're not particularly concerned about pomp and circumstance, but that's rather touching, you know, that they would respect the office that way. And then one day, Michael, I heard the story about a business tycoon and parrots. And do you want to hear that story?
I do.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I do.
So this business tycoon was away from home an awful lot, and he thought he needed something to sort of provide more company to the family and children. He thought talking parrots. So he goes to a pet shop and walks in and says to the owner, "I'd like a parrot." The owner says, "Here are the parrots up here on this wall. That red one, what's that cost?" "Oh, that's $2,000. $2,000 for a parrot. What can that parrot do?" "That parrot can operate a computer." "What about the blue one over here? That's $4,000. $4,000 for a parrot. What can that parrot do?" "That parrot can program a computer." "Oh, heavens." "Well, what about the orange parrot right there? That's $10,000. $10,000 for a parrot. What's so special about that parrot?" The owner pauses for a moment and says, "Well, sir, to be honest with you, we really don't know." He doesn't say very much. He doesn't know very much. He just sits there, and the other two parrots call him boss. Now, I need a couple other rebuttals. Je suis ravi d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui parce que je suis chez moi. It's a reunion coming back to this place I love, McGill, and seeing all of you, many old friends. Jeanette, thank you for that thoughtful introduction. The only thing important about me is I'm father of 5 daughters and 14 grandchildren, and all the important things I've learned in life from my children, and I'm now relearning them from the grandchildren. And they call me Grandpa Book because I read books to the little ones. I should say with Dick here, Dick is the finest academic leader I've ever seen, not simply in Canada, but around the world. And my heavens, we had such a great time. Dick and I and the other team and that wonderful faculty of medicine in the university. But my gosh, great leadership will out, and that's why our faculty of medicine thrived under Dick's leadership and continues to do so. And Michael came to us in a remarkable situation. We had been dependent on perhaps 20 or so English-speaking families throughout McGill's history. And it was clear that that dependence was not going to be able to carry the institution any further. And it took a little while to convince our colleagues that we needed a vice principal external. And we were lucky and found, I think, the finest person we could. Michael came to us, having been based with Ketchum in the United States, ran a very successful campaign at Laval, and came to McGill not simply to run a campaign, but to be our vice president external, and helped us to reach out in ways that we had not even thought about or dreamt about. And in his time at McGill was clearly the leading person in that responsibility across Canadian universities, and was a great pioneer, and we owe so much to him. So thank you, Michael. Great to be here with you.
Thank you, David. It's a very, very kind thing to say. I think I speak for all of us here that our time with you at McGill was a golden era. Probably for the university, certainly in our lives. It was a really wonderful time, and you and Sharon and your daughters. Am I okay? You and Sharon and your daughters were just, illuminated the campus in our lives and helped us all feel very part of an important and meaningful enterprise. And it was, I'm sure I speak for everyone in this room about that. And as far as you go, again, you were the best boss I ever had. And I really want to just say, before we get to what I'm sure will be an exciting conversation and response to questions here, that at a time in world history when truly inspiring leaders are rare, at a time when divisiveness is rampant, we're again facing issues of immigration and transience, and authoritarians are, sort of threatening our liberal aspirations. You, dear David, are a real beacon of light, and we are so grateful to have you here, and very, very appreciative of the timeless and sort of foundational guidance you've given us in this book, to which we'll refer often in this conversation. So we have some really good questions for you. Some of them have been already submitted to me. I have them here in front of me. We should be able to gather a few more while we're talking. and look forward to answering as many people's questions as possible. Although I'm quite comfortable with the idea, as I'm sure you are, that we'll wander a bit. There are 3 different areas that have sort of come to the fore in the early questions, and they are the constitutional monarchy, the current situation of Quebec, issues in Quebec, and the present and future state of the Canadian University. Now, I'm sure there'll be other issues that we touch, but let me begin with a first question, if that's all right. Is that, yeah. This question comes from John Gradwell. John, from the Faculty of Education, and it's about what I've always considered to be one of Canada's most endearing and important dimensions, and that is multiculturalism. John asks, Canada's multiculturalism has always been a fact of life. Against the backdrop of our multiculturalism, what do you see as the common values that unite us as Canadians?
Yeah, it's a broad and very profound question, John. Should expect. First of all, let me deal with titles. I should tell you that any time Your Excellency or Right Honourable is used, that's part of the past. It's a $10 fine. Those fines go to the Rideau Hall Foundation, and it doubles with each subsequent offense. So, Debbie, you've worn up quite a bill so far, and Michael, you're getting there.
I'll pay up, don't worry.
I think the great genius of Canada has been its ability to see difference not as something that divides us or indeed frightens us, but enriches us. There's a wonderful expression in, I think it was in Le Petit Prince by Saint-Exupéry, who said, I am different from you, but because I am different, I do not diminish you, I enrich in you. And, you know, this is a country that, beginning with our First Nations people, our Indigenous people, put root in a very challenging land. And it's been subsequent waves of immigration that have built this country around common values, which are, first of all, a sense of fairness. I suppose it's articulated in our Constitution, whose theme in 1867 were peace, order, and good government. In fact, it was peace, fairness, and good government, but the British draft people changed that to order because they wanted the militia paid for here. Peace, order, and good governance. And our friends in the United States with a different mindset, France as well, with their constitutions, was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness or private property, individualism versus collectivism. So, John, we've always had a sense of the collectivity, and have had to have a dependence on one another to help to settle this somewhat challenging land with the large distances, the communication gaps, the change of seasons, and sometimes a very harsh climate. And so that fairness has also become part of looking after one another, the barn-raising notion, which I think is through our history. Then I would say equality of opportunity has really been important. Almost all of us have come from immigrant backgrounds that were poor, very often oppressed, certainly not with great station, but came here for the opportunities that life will be better for our children and for our grandchildren. And that, I think, has continued to be an important theme of Canada, that we are optimistic, life will be better, and we'll work together to make it better. And the notion of equality of opportunity, the absence of a class system, I think has been a very important feature of making Canada both a fairer country and also a country that causes us to look after one another. And I think we have lessons to teach the world. We should not be arrogant about it. Heavens knows there are lots of things we have to improve. But when we think of this world that has seen such erosion and trust in our public institutions, has put democracies under fail, Canada really is a beacon of light, I think, in indicating that we can work together for difference. And from that difference, develop not only new energy, but new creativity. It really is the case that if you introduce somewhat different ways of thinking and different cultures into a mix, what comes out is richer and probably more effective in the long run. So for me, that's the genius of Canada. I began writing about these things when I was Gigi. The first book we wrote was called The Idea of Canada. It's my custom of writing letters in the morning where I tried to capture that. And the next two we did was we're not very concerned about innovation. Innovation is just doing things better. It's not just technological innovation or business innovation, it's social innovation. And that, I think, also has been a gift of Canada, that we thought of how we do things better. And then the next book along was Trust, which arose because of my concern about eroding trust in public institutions. And the book we finished a few months ago, will come out in January, is called Empathy. Empathy, not simply sympathy, I feel sorry for your situation, but empathy, I see your situation and I walk hand in hand to help it. So that's been sort of my focus on Canadian values.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm so always struck when I speak with you about what a teacher you are. You're at your core, you're a teacher. And so moving into public service as you have just seems so natural. As a follow-up to that question, can you talk a little bit about the state of immigration in the country now and its importance in maintaining a strong multicultural Canada? Yeah.
Well, the first thing I say, Michael, is, you know, by and large, Canadians see that as a strength. Not all, and we have fissures in that, of course, and have had from time to time over the decades, etc. But the majority of Canadians, the strong majority of Canadians, see immigration and pluralism and the embracing of multiculturalism as a strength for the country. And on a practical basis, it clearly has. The children of immediate immigrants do much better than the children of our families that have been around for generations, etc., just as one indication. And that has served us well, and I think it's important to see what's special about Canada as we look at the world scene. One of the privileges of being Governor General is you have the opportunity to meet people you admire very much. When heads of state come here, they would stay in Rideau Hall. So Angela Merkel was with us for a weekend and got to know her a little bit. Remarkable woman, researcher by background, daughter of a Lutheran pastor. She had 4 or 5 of her ministers, and we had a seminar looking on some of these big issues. And my question to her was whether the European Union, peace in Europe for 70 years at that point of time, Nobel Prize for Peace for it, where does it go from here? Her question to me was, how on earth can you make such a heterodox community work with all these different cultures, different regions, and different orientations and so on? And rather than trying to give her a lengthy answer like I'm just giving, I went down the hall to where I kept about 20 copies of the book Why Nations Fail by Darren Acemoglu of MIT and James Robinson then of Harvard, a product of the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, by the way, its Global Society project. But their thesis is very simple. Over history, those societies, nations, regions that are inclusive in their economics and politics are in an upward spiral. And those that are extractive, not exclusive, extractive in their economics and politics are in a downward spiral. And I said, that really summarizes it. Somehow we've made inclusivity and the welcoming of difference a part of our DNA. And those nations that become extractive, and we see plenty of them, are in a very difficult situation.
Oh. Well, all these thoughts, and certainly much of your book, has caused some of our members here today to ask specific questions about the province of Quebec. And Debbie voiced, I think, an issue, a question that's on many people's minds about how she begins by saying we are all recognize the importance of trust in our personal and professional lives and public lives. Some of us, she says, are especially interested in what you have to suggest today regarding the way forward for the Anglophone minority in this province, many of whom feel vulnerable and perhaps even unrepresented both in Ottawa and in Quebec City.
Well, we faced that earlier and other times in our history, Michael. When I came to McGill in 1979, you come shortly after, I think there was a high degree of anxiety. Was Quebec going to be separate? And one of the challenges Dick and I and our other colleagues had is how do we demonstrate that McGill is strong? It's having difficulty with funding from a more nationalist government, but we will be resilient. And, this institution was remarkably resilient. Not everybody likes the Maclean's annual ratings, but McGill was #1 through that period. McGill is #1 today. And that's quite something when you think of the support levels in Toronto and Ontario for the University of Toronto and the support levels in the University of British Columbia. They got about $1 billion of those lands that are used as a trust fund, et cetera, and they've done well. And when you look at the support available to the University of Alberta and University of Calgary, McGill has been in a much less privileged position, but it has continued to be really, really strong. And I would say that, that for me is one of the marks of optimism of what the Anglophone community has done in building a great university in the world scene. I would also say that the community has been resilient. During my time at McGill and since, English speakers by and large are pretty fluent in French and very comfortable with it. And that's a great richness. In our family, we came speaking only English. I had high school French, you memorize vocabulary. I passed my foreign language requirement in Latin because we had a good Latin teacher and didn't have a good teacher in French and German, etc. But our daughters, aged 3 to 10 at the time, all went into French school speaking no French. And Debbie and Allie, the two eldest, failed their first year. And we thought, what have we done as parents? In London, Ontario, their biggest problem was they didn't have enough days in the week to go all the birthday parties they were invited to, and here for a year they were never invited to another child's home. But they were resilient, and thanks to my wife Sharon, they became very comfortable, and today they practice law or practice medicine in English, French, and Spanish very easily, and on from what happened in our children's lives of being able to live in this multicultural community and are important public servants because of that. And I think that will be the same as, we go through the next 5 or 10 years. There will be rising tides of nationalism, Quebec nationalism, et cetera, expressed one way or another. But I'm very optimistic. We managed through 2 referenda, and Canada as whole. The French-speaking business community is much stronger, much prouder. Those are all good things. So if I have a message, it is, you continue to build those great institutions like McGill University that has not only done a great deal for bringing folks together in this province, but being one of the true pinnacles of excellence for this country. And that's what we need, is more pinnacles of excellence. At one time I gave a Canadian Club speech here early on. It was Montréal, Ville Universitaire, Montreal, a city of universities and education. And I said, if we look at the history of this city, it has been at its best when we've had the different cultural groups work together in a kind of harmony. Think of the creativity and the great zest for life of our French-Canadian colleagues. Think of the practicality and the tenacity of the English settlers, particularly those Scots merchants who built McGill. And think of the Jewish people in this community who have taught us so much about learning, about education, about respect for history, and so on. When those 3 groups and others work together, you couldn't beat this city. And today, in one of the major ranking surveys of the world, Montreal is regarded as the best city in the world in which to be a student. Why is that so? It's drawing something from the cultural richness of the city. And for me, that's a great sign forward of being very optimistic.
Yeah. Wonderful point. And it leads very, very nicely into, you've actually begun to answer the question. I just want to go on record saying I offered to get him some water, but he didn't want it.
Say, Kelly, that's usually a signal from Kelly to cut your answers in half. They're getting too long.
Oh, I see.
The next signal she gives is this one. I'll share it with you.
It leads into a question that Ante actually had prepared earlier, and you've begun to answer it, but we'd love to hear if you have other thoughts on this. Has your experience as GG changed the way that you see the role of universities in developing Canadian society?
Yeah, it has. I have always thought they had a pretty important role. In fact, to me, the biggest single feature of equality of opportunity in this country is our education system, our public education system. And without being arrogant, we certainly have areas to improve. I don't think there's another country in the world that works as hard at and does as well at equality of opportunity and excellence too. That you can have those concepts of those values not as mutually destructive, but mutually reinforcing. And that's true of our university system. Not perfect by any ways, but the universities sort of stand out in that system, which has been so important in making democracy work in this country. There was once an OECD study that looked at social mobility based on the degree to which children exceeded the level of education of their parents. They divided the OECD countries, 34, 35, into quintiles. Canada was number one in the top 4 quintiles. The top 80% of population showed that in Canada, as contrasted with the others, children exceeded their parents' levels of education greater than the others. So a continuous movement upwards. And you'd think for the bottom 20%, rising tide rises all boats, that would also put Canada in the top 3 or 4. Actually, we're down in the bottom half, which does mean that we have chinks and so on, problems. One of them is our Indigenous people, and I'll speak a little bit about a teacher's initiative later in that. For me, being able to watch universities from outside, so to speak, in the 7 years I was at Rideau Hall, I've seen universities in a new light. And one of the things that has impressed me so much is not simply being institutions of equality of opportunity and excellence too, but being more involved in their communities. I think this gathering of McGill University retired people looking at continuous learning, et cetera, is a big part of it. You know, a university should be kind of a cradle to grave institution that from the first time a student writes and applies and is accepted, they're part of that institution. They get an undergraduate degree and on through. But that educational responsibility, I think, should stay with the alumni all the way through and be the first place that one would go for things. And the final thing I'd say about universities is I'm a little bit concerned that we don't push that final excellence as much as we want. We have 3 universities in the top 100 in the world, Toronto, UBC, and McGill. We should have 8 or 9 in the top 100 in the world, and others coming along. And in fact, you know, in my romantic mind, Canada should be the Athens to the new Romes of the world in terms of how we value knowledge, educating talent, and being a place where people come from everywhere in the world to study, et cetera. And our young people practice global citizenship by going out. And that, I think, is sort of an important step forward for us.
Yes. How lucky we are to have been part of it and continue to be part of the university system. Yeah. We're running out of time already, and I really need to get to another question area. There are a few questions from the audience today, but the question of the constitutional monarchy was formulated in this way. As we laid Elizabeth II to rest, many have celebrated her reign. Many others have voiced a familiar concern about the relevance and purpose and privilege of the royal family. So will you talk to us a little bit about your views today of
Sure.
the constitutional monarchy and its relevance and the future of the office of the Governor General?
Sure. Well, first of all, she was quite remarkable, 70 years as our sovereign, and we shall not see her like again in history. She epitomized the leader's servant role more than any person I know. When young people ask me that question, I said, well, think about the alternative from our system. And bear in mind that our system comes from 1,000 years of British history with a good influence from French and continental history as well. And it's shown the beauty or the genius of being able to evolve with different situations. The constitutional monarchy and the heredity part creates a stability that many nations don't have, and is quite precious. And in Bagehot's words, the constitutional lawyer of the 19th century, we have a divided crown. One part of the crown is the business of government. That's our elected officials, et cetera, who tax us, et cetera, and provide programs and so on and protect us. And then you have the dignified crown, not the business of government, the dignified part of business, which is non-political, non-partisan, no power whatsoever, but protects the Constitution and reinforces the fundamental values of what makes for a progressive and healthy society. And I say to young people, if you wanted to list 6 or 7 countries that have pretty satisfactory governments around the world that meet the needs of the people, my guess is you'd have on the list Norway, Sweden, Denmark. We used to say United Kingdom. I've had to hold that now with Elizabeth Truss's resignation and Boris Johnson's. New Zealand, Netherlands, and Canada. What's common to them? They're all hereditary constitutional monarchy. There's something about that stability that comes. The second thing I would say is, what percentage of the world's population lives in a fully functioning democracy? Fully functioning democracy. 50%? 25? 15? The Economist Intelligence Unit says it's 8.3%. And the countries in rank order of fully functioning are Iceland, Norway, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, New Zealand, and Canada. Sweden being the only country of 10 million, the others much smaller, Canada be 39 million. And the US and France are not in that list of fully functioning democracies. So what's special about these countries? All but one, Iceland, have constitutional hereditary monarchies, and they have the stability that has come through that over the ages. I guess the final thing I would say about it is, from a practical matter, for us to move to a dramatically different system, a republican system, first of all, under our Constitution in 1982, you need consent of the 10 provinces with the majority support for that. That almost certainly is not going to happen as a practical matter. The other thing is, when you look at the alternatives, you'd say, okay, we don't have a hereditary monarch, but we want to keep the head of state and head of government functions separate. So would you elect a governor general? I think that would be a big mistake, because you don't need 2 power centers vowing with one another for responsibilities, etc. In fact, you want one of those 2 institutions that has no desire for power whatsoever and has no interest in glorifying who happens to hold that position at a given time, but serves the institution. And then would you appoint a governor general if you want to keep it? I guess you could. The Senate appoint it, so government on the recommendation of the cabinet and so on. But I just think what we have works pretty well. Now, there'd be a challenge for King Charles, and following in his mother's footsteps is going to be extraordinary. And we'll see 2 or 3 other countries in the Commonwealth who will leave. Barbados has done so. Jamaica will probably do so, perhaps 1 or 2. And the Australians, with a new government whose head is Republican, are talking about repeating the 1999 experiment, where a Labour government came in and wanted to abolish the monarchy. But before they could put the question to the referendum, which they were obliged to do, the Liberal, quote, conservative government came in, and instead of putting a question, are you for or against the constitutional monarchy, they put 3 questions, 3 options, and there wasn't a majority for any one of them, so there was no change, etc. So Australia may change. But my practical point of view is that I think this has served us very well. We have shown the ability to evolve in terms of our constitutional responsibilities. I think we'll continue to do that, and so I'm just a great believer in what we have.
Thank you. Thank you. That was interesting. Well, I'm just getting a set of some new questions, and it's very interesting to me to see that many of these questions involve around you, the teacher, the individual, the person, and life lessons. And so this group is saying, keep writing those books and keep coming to see us.
It's hard work, hard work.
Keep writing those books. But we have about 10 minutes or so. I want to give you an opportunity to share with us a little more about the Rideau Hall Foundation before this session's over. But let me ask, I'm going to try to get 2 or 3 questions in before that. The first question is, would you, and this is before questions about you personally, would you please comment a bit on the wealth inequality issue in the nation? You cite it as one of the reasons why there is an erosion of trust in Canada today. I know it's not as pronounced an issue in Canada as it is in the United States, but it is an issue. And the difference between the really well-to-do and the rest of us is growing scarily. So can you just comment a little bit about the Canadian situation?
Let me be simple. When I could go into great length, but I just think that we have reached a stage in history where the inequality of wealth has become really quite extreme, and dramatically so over the past 20 years or so. And if you look at history, when societies had those dramatic differences in equality of wealth, and it was growing, and there was a sense at this end that life was not very optimistic, you begin to develop the great discontent, and ultimately that society will come apart. I think Canada's been somewhat more moderate, but I'm a guy that writes books on corporate law, for example. I serve on corporate boards, and I'm happy to do so and believe very much in innovation and wealth creation, but it should be shared. But I can't justify the CEO of a corporation being paid 300 times than the person that sweeps the floor. It just doesn't make sense to me. Ed Clark, who was the CEO of TD, and I served on the Canada Trust Board when Ed was there, a great hero of mine, a guy I like a lot. And Ed was asked by one of the really penetrating television commentators, Mr. Clark, how can you justify your salary and your stock options, which are 150 times what the teller's paid? He said, I can't. He says, it's outrageous. It just shouldn't happen. He said, the only way I can justify it, look in the mirror, is to give most of it away. And that's what Ed does. So, you know, there's a balance there. Obviously, you want to create wealth, but you want to distribute it. Canada, by and large, has done a better job than most. Not perfect, but most.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
But you keep going down that path for any society, you're going to get into trouble.
Yeah. Okay.
You want to ask me about the teacher? I'll be quick on that.
Yeah.
In my installation address in 2010, which was a smart and caring nation, a call to service, I said, if you remember only 3 words of what I say today, they are cherish our teachers. Cherish our teachers, because apart from our family, they are the individuals who have the most impact on us, your teachers, mentors, coaches. And I said, if we had 3 or 4 hours today in the Senate chambers, I'd tell you 25 stories of teachers, mentors, coaches that have made a difference in my life, and how lucky I have been to cross paths with them and just be smart enough to say, what's special about that guy? What's special about Dick Cruz as an academic leader? And say, I like those values, and I'd like to kind of pursue them. That's important.
Music to our ears, those of us who have devoted our lives to education. Thank you. So what, to get personal, what is the most important lesson you've learned in life, other than cherish teachers?
Well, my faith is an important part of my life. And the essence of Christian faith is love thy neighbor. I say, Michael, not in jest, that all the important things in life I've learned from my children, and now my grandchildren. And I was just chatting with you, a bit of my background. I grew up in quite a modest home in Northern Ontario resource community, and there wasn't much income in our home. My dad was unemployed for much of the time that I was in high school. And I learned from age 7 or 8 that you had to be self-reliant, so I had a job and so on. And I guess you would say there was a kind of toughness that was very much self-reliance. And I had to learn, I think, gradually, empathy, reliance on other people, depending on other people, and so on. I began to see it by those mentors and teachers that would help me, but it's when my children came along and we saw them and raising them that I became a much more empathetic person. And I'm embarrassing Dick here, but I'll be speaking at the memorial service for Dick's wife, Sylvia, passed away several months ago. And I'll look at Sylvia as the professional, but also the person, and say, we were really fortunate to come to know Dick and Sylvia, Mr. and Mrs. Dock, as our children called them, skiing at Mont Tremblant. And all 5 of our daughters have been profoundly influenced by her values. And that was a great gift from her to us, but it was great importance, I think, for them to learn a number of qualities, including empathy.
Well, I hope I'm not speaking out of school, but as we were discussing this just a little while ago, you even went so far as to say it was your daughters who taught you to love.
That's right. Yeah, pure and simple. I could expand on it, but that's it.
Yeah,
And my wife.
yeah.
Yeah, and I use that word, you know, without any embarrassment. I mean, love is important, and I've learned it from my children, my wife.
Yeah.
That's what caused us to write the empathy book. The trust book, I find writing hard. I'm now working on the 6th edition of Canadian Securities Regulation. If you have trouble sleeping, one page of that book will do the trick for you very much. But it's hard, bloody work. And I've only been able to do it because other people helped me, including former students of mine and so on. But I was compelled to write the empathy book. Trust I wrote because I was worried about the erosion of trust in public institutions and what we should do about it. Empathy I wrote, it's more autobiographical, and it was really, like I say, partly my journey in life, learning the importance of the regard for the other. David Brooks writes a book called Two Mountains. He's a New York Times editorialist. And the first mountain is the mountain that all you folks who are type A, great achievers, climb up that mountain, and you're well regarded by your peers, and you have a certain satisfaction of, you know, what you're doing to make a difference, etc. And there is satisfaction. But he says if you're lucky, you look across the valley to the second mountain where other people are climbing up without the same level of success, and you reach across and walk with them to help them along. And that satisfaction is more than happiness, it's a kind of joy. And I think finding that second mountain in life is pretty key.
Mm-hmm. I really love your life story. I think so many people have kind of the opposite experience. They're born into a safe and nurturing environment and toughen as they go. You toughened at an early age, but were softened by the kind and loving women around you.
Yeah, and I'd say broaden probably, Michael. Broaden. What's that famous E.B. White, the New Yorker editor that wrote Charlotte's Web? Have you read that to your children and grandchildren? Yeah, if you haven't, read Charlotte's Web, then Stuart Little to them. But he was a great believer in seeing things whole. And I think as a person, you want to see things whole. And beginning with, you're not the center of the universe. And then see the qualities in other people that you bring about. And I say trust is a verb that says roll up your sleeves, i.e. go and do something about it. Trust is the glue and the grease that holds our society together. The glue and the foundation is the grease in making things easier.
Well, we're all so fond of you and so proud of you and so happy we know you. Tell us a little bit about the Rideau Hall Foundation and how we, through our understanding and support, can help you advance the causes and issues that you're most interested in today.
Well, it goes back to the role of the Office of Governor General. We were sworn in 2010, and Stephen Wallace was our Chief Operating Officer, and a marvelous guy. And we carefully went through the criteria for the Governor General to be a patron of a particular organization, and you inherit some. I think there were 30 or 40 that we inherited. And we established the criteria to be helpful, but have a bar of integrity and so on. And we ended up, after 3 months, we had about 200 organizations of which the GG was patron. And I thought, well, that's nice. It's on a letterhead, and I suppose it's moderately helpful to that organization. But then I really felt embarrassed. You put your name on that, and then you don't do anything. You just sit there like that parrot, that $10,000 parrot, and said, you know, we should be helping these organizations become more successful in what they're doing in their volunteer work and so on, and more professional and concerned about governance matters, those kinds of really integrity things. And we tried to do it with the existing office of really good people, but they just didn't have the entrepreneurial thinking to do that. They just weren't geared to establishing networks or coalitions. They didn't raise money. It was kind of verboten that the Governor General office would do it, even though, you know, Prince Charles and the royal family have been very good at that kind of thing. So we had a advisory committee in philanthropy and volunteerism and said, if you're going to get anywhere doing things with those patron organizations and others, you got to be much more entrepreneurial. So we set up the Rideau Hall Foundation. We had no money from 2012 on. Community Foundations of Canada devoted their 3 senior executives to help it go. And then there was a custom that's 40, 50 years old. When a GG leaves office, he or she is entitled to start a foundation in their name, and the government puts in $3 million, and then another $7 million on a one-to-one match basis. And we went to Mr. Harper at the time and said, this doesn't make sense to have a new foundation every time a GG leaves office. And in our view, this isn't about an individual. It's about an institution that is important. And the idea of honoring a departing Governor General at the foundation just doesn't make any sense to me. And by and large, you can develop governance issues on the matter. If Governor General is rather elderly, wouldn't do that. And is it going to be sustained or not? So we said, replace that and start the Rideau Hall Foundation, but attach it loosely to the existing institution so that that foundation can amplify the reach of the Office of the Governor General in terms of these fundamental values, these patron organizations. And so we began to do that and have a wonderful professional team. Kelly's part of it. Teresa Marcus leads it. And we've exceeded beyond our wildest dreams in 10 years. So we're just now in our 10th anniversary campaign for it. We have an endowment of about $35 million, which we raised, and we hope to raise that to 50 so that we can cover operating expenses. But the kind of things we do, just to name 2 that I'm really excited about and really working on, is one, we have a partnership with MasterCard Foundation to educate 10,000 Indigenous young people as teachers over the next decade. $45 million investment by MasterCard. There'll be further investments as we go along. And it's an educational initiative that is not driven from the center saying this is what Indigenous people should do. It's originally with the Indigenous groups, the faculties of education working together to create curricula for educating teachers. And I think we can eliminate the education gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous young people in 10 or 15 years if we establish teaching as a noble profession. At the present time, it's only about 1/3 of what you'd expect from the Indigenous young people going into the teaching profession. We should turn that around. The second major program we started in 2012 on the Queen Elizabeth's Diamond Jubilee is the Government of Canada made a $10 million gift for a particular cause. Mr. Chrétien was asked to raise the money for the rest of it, sat down with us. We came up with the idea of a global education program in Queen Elizabeth's names in Canada. Canadian students going abroad to work, volunteer, academic exchange, etc., and international students coming in. And to date, that's about $85 million that's been invested in that to support about 3,000 students. With the passing of the Queen, the government has now put $20 million that we in Universities Canada manage to make it permanent. And we're now approaching the provinces once again and foundations and others to raise that to $60 million, which will be a ongoing, continuous Queen Elizabeth Scholars Program, which I hope will be as respected as the Rhodes Scholarships in Canada or Fulbrights, etc. But it's the Queen's notion of global citizenship. She was so conscious of that, of bringing people together across cultural divides. And that notion, the best single thing we do in universities is to give our young people an international experience. And the best other thing we can do is bring as many young people to study here in Canada as Athens to the New Rome.
Your daughters did that in spades, didn't
Did they ever?
Yeah.
And they're much better as a consequence. I say that they began international exchanges at age 12, and they'd been exposed to some sort of poverty difference in their lives, but not a great deal. 4 things happened in their formation through those exchanges. One, they became more curious. Secondly, they became more tolerant. You're different from me. That's okay. I'm interested in the difference. Third, their judgment became better. They look for the other side of the story. Like a good engineer, they triangulate, they want an angle. But fourth, they became more empathetic. And that kind of growing formation, I think, is really important, and the Queen Elizabeth Scholars Program will do that well. So that's 2 of the things. We do a whole lot of other things that are reinforcing the civic society, the social capital of the country, including a lot of programs on innovation. 2 of the books out there, for example, are ones we wrote on innovation for adults and innovation for children. It's 300 stories of Canadian innovators really focusing on a culture of innovation, which is simply doing things better. That's what innovation is, whether it's scientific, technological, or social, doing things better. And that program involved Governor General Innovation Awards, and now a program called Genius Plus, where high school students will be encouraged to involve themselves in innovative projects and provide them mentoring, counseling, and some funding to help them, and on and on.
And are you also doing something to amplify the good work of recognizing Canadians for their achievements through the Order of Canada and things like that? Yeah.
Yes, promoting the Order of Canada is clearly one. The other bookend, and I'll speak about only one thing, was volunteers. Romeo LeBlanc, when he was Governor General, started the Caring Canadian Award because he came from an Acadian village, poor background, and knew how important the volunteers were in the community. And through his time, there were 30 or 40 of these awards made each year. And then it fell on budget cuts after his time and had disappeared. And Stephen and I sat down looking at celebrating important things. We said volunteerism is so key in the country. In fact, I use as an index to the health of a particular community whether its volunteer component is higher than what the per capita representation would be, or whether it's lower. If it's higher, that community's healthy in every respect. If it's lower, it's not. So we said we're going to restore that. But we didn't have any money, the budget cuts. So this was the first fundraising that the Rideau Hall Foundation did. And we raised $5 million to bulletproof that program from budget cuts. And in discussion with the Queen about it, we suggested that maybe we could raise it from a Governor General's honor to a Sovereign's honor, Queen Elizabeth. And she said, yes, I'd be very happy, but call it the Sovereign's Medal for Volunteerism, typical of her looking ahead. And so in our last year, I think there were 1,000 of those awarded each year. And you see, that's a lot, but there's something like, 6,000 communities across the country, all of whom have volunteers. We should do more of that. And what we want to do is deploy that to the lieutenant governors, et cetera, so that we celebrate volunteerism. And one of the most touching ceremonies that Sharon and I would attend being across the country would be these ceremonies where you'd be honoring 30 or 40 volunteers in the community. And typically, they'd be quite embarrassed. They say, well, I ran the food bank for 30 years, but what about all those people who helped? And it was really, these were the mentors in the community, the people who are the examples of being volunteers and just doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And a bookend of the Order of Canada. Order of Canada, the people that are in the newspaper, et cetera, these are the unsung heroes. Yeah. And it's important to have the unsung heroes in this country. And our time is up.
Our time is up, friends. To state the obvious, we are in the presence of greatness, a great talker. Great talker.
That's a $100 fine, that one.
a great teacher and a great friend. David, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here.
We left for the blind.
And there's a book signing now? Yeah. Good.
Has to get me back in order. Better? Better. Okay. Jeanette will wait, please, Mr. Johnston. There's a couple of thank yous before we get to the book signing. But Jeanette will thank Mr. Johnston, who I'm not going to call His Excellency or the Right Honourable. And I just want to say a couple of words. It was very, very special for me to hear you live and in first voice and not just on the pages of the book. So thank you so much. And Jeanette will continue. But Michael, on behalf of MURA, the McGill University Retirees Association, we would like to extend our gratitude to you for crossing international borders at the tail end of a pandemic to be with your former colleagues, now McGill retirees. And we could not think of a more rigorous and thoughtful interviewer of Mr. Johnston. So thank you very much. And we'll present.
On behalf of the McGill University Retiree Association, do you hear me? Yeah? Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you, Principal Johnson, if I can call you Principal Johnson. This has been a most inspiring and uplifting fireside chat, and we're so grateful to you, and we thank you for all the work, the tremendous work you do at the Rideau Hall Foundation. So I will just remind our colleagues here that the proceeds from the sale of the book will be, the book trust will be given to the Rideau Hall Foundation that is celebrating its 10th anniversary, as our former principal said. I encourage you to give generously to the Rideau Hall Foundation to support its myriad of local community and First Nations projects, as well as its nation-building initiatives. So a special thanks to all the volunteers that have helped to organize this event today. And the book signing and the book purchase is going to take place in the hallway. So thank you all for your participation. This has been great. Thank you.